And good afternoon and good morning for some today. Really appreciate you all taking some time out of your day today to listen to us around cybersecurity. And this is the first of three cybersecurity sessions that we're going to be doing what we call our summer security series that we'll be hosting here over the next few months. This being the first installment of it. So really appreciate you all taking some time out of your day to listen to us and chat with us here. One thing I like we're going to be waiting here for a little bit for others to join. And while we're waiting, before we dive into it, I like to kind of open up with some trivia. That's just kind of the way that I treat these things. And it's always unique on days and just kind of looking at, hey, what happened this day in history? And feel free to answer in the chat or come off mute and answer, but it's basically who can Google the fastest is what this turns into. So let's see if we have some fast Googlers here. But for all you Civil War buffs that are on here with us, what battle started today back in 1861? It was the first major land battle of the Civil War. Out there. Anybody?
Manassas?
Could try for it something. Land battle.
Bull Run.
There we go. Chris Taylor got it. And somebody came off mute there. So fantastic. Really appreciate it there. Next one is for you literature buffs that are out there. Who is the famous writer that we all know that was born on this day in 1899? 1899 famous writer. It's male. So I'll give you another little hint.
Ernest Hemingway.
Mr. Hemingway.
There you go. Thank you, Patrick and team there. Awesome. And then the last one, a little bit more for more today's folks, for Harry Potter fans. Which book was released this day in 2007? The Harry Potter series. Anybody?
Deathly Hollows.
Yep, you're right. Awesome. The last book of Harry Potter. So awesome. Really appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and get started here with our presentation. Again, really appreciate everybody joining. Got a number of folks on here. When you say security and IT, everybody jumps and wants to know more. And that's what we're doing today. It's all about educating everybody that's out there. You know, we don't like getting the panic calls. I know Brian doesn't like getting the panic calls from customers that, hey, this is going on. What do I do? Type of piece here. So what we're doing over these three sessions that we have set up here is all about education. Because we want to help out folks as much as possible when it comes to security, protecting your environment, educating you, scaring you, you know, that's kind of one-on-one with the whole security realm. But it's all about you today to make sure that you're aware. We get a lot of questions when we do any type of security presentation. So feel free to ask those questions either in the chat, or heck, we're all grown-ups now and we know how to do these Zoom meetings or Teams meetings. Put yourself off mute and ask away. It's all about helping out here. I will be monitoring the chat while Brian talks on here. So just know that it's fully interactive here. So go ahead. I want to introduce who the presenters are here today. My name is Ben Grimion. I'm a senior account executive here at Davenport Group. Been doing this a long time, you know, 9 years here at Davenport Group, but I'm 19 years in the IT industry, where I've been focused solely on helping out customers, helping educate them on these. I'm a big outdoors lover, and then also I'm a member of the Who Dat Nation and New Orleans Saints band here. Now, we're also going to have Brian Bennett, who is our field CISO here at Davenport Group with extensive experience around the security realm. And he's also always learning more and more because, as you know, and as you probably some of you have been the experienced of, is he knows things change constantly, and he knows the threats that are out there to help out and further educate all the individuals that are attending here today. But just a fantastic resource to have here at Davenport Group and a resource for you. So for those of you that are new to Davenport Group, you may not know who we are. So I want to take a quick moment to talk to you about Davenport Group. We are a full-scale IT solution provider. And what that means to you is really we can help you out with any solutions from mouse to the cloud that are out there, and really anywhere in between. You can see the solutions listed here that we focus on, security, storage, hyperconverged infrastructure, really a whole gamut of solutions that we provide, as well as we have the services to do just tons within your environment and help out. And I've been here a long time, and I've seen this list just grow and grow and grow as we've not only had customers ask, hey, can you help me out with this? But then we've been able to find the engineering resources to really hit that, and the best engineering resources in the country to help you out with these types of solutions that are out there. The thing that really is different from Davenport Group, from other providers that I've seen over my 19 years of doing this, is that we focus solely on that relationship with our customers. So what that means is working with the same individuals over and over and over again. You're not having to go back and work with somebody new because that's, salesperson or that engineer moved on. It's every quarter that we've seen. It's, hey, you know how we did this project? Well, I need to do this project to complement that. You're going to be able to work with the same individuals over and over again, the same engineers over and over again. And you're going to really build those relationships and trust over the time in working with us. And that's the thing that's really the differentiator that Davenport Group brings to the table. You can see we're partners with a number of technologies out there, including Dell Technologies, VMware, and Microsoft Gold partner. And we also have those implementation services to help out across the board, really anywhere, mouse to the cloud. So really want to have the opportunity to help you out if you're interested in talking about us about security and some of the things that we talked about today, or anything that you're seeing on this list. We're going to have the appropriate account executive follow up with you to connect you with that and see where we can help, because we are nationwide. We're talking with people all across the country here today, and we love to help you out wherever you need help with that. And so now that you know a little bit about Davenport Group, we're going to turn it over to Brian Bennett, who's our field CISO, and we'll be doing our presentation here today on the security. And again, really appreciate your time. And if you could keep yourself on mute unless you have a question during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat and interrupting Brian if you have any questions there. But if you feel comfortable, just take yourself off mute and ask away. With that, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Ben. All right, next slide, please. Anyone that's been on any of my webinars or heard me speak, I always start out with facts. Ben does trivia, I do facts, because I really like to set the stage of what's really out there. Most of us on this call today, I recognize a lot of familiar names. It's our jobs, to secure environments and to keep things safe for our business. But sometimes we don't pay attention to what's really going on out and around us. So in some of these facts I come up with today, 686.8 million accounts are hacked each day. Now that's an average that we look at across the board. And what's become interesting over the last couple of years is that seems like an astronomically high number, but you look back at some of the ones that have been, companies have been breached. I think one that I remember was one of the credit card middlemen got attacked, and there was 421 million accounts that were breached and compromised, from that one single attack. And so that's what we hear now. Then you got to even take into account the ones that never get reported. Next, we talk about 34% increase in phishing attacks alone in 2021. This is still the #1 attack vector that the bad guys, bad girls, that they use to get into our businesses. The last number I saw, this accounts for about 90% of malware, viruses, breaches, compromises of how they got into businesses. So, I mean, that's a pretty staggering fact. When we think about all the things that we as IT leaders put in our environment to try to keep things secure, and it still comes down to someone clicking on something in an email. Next, we talk about 287 days is the average time that organizations identify a breach. So they're scary to both sides of that. There are some businesses that find it much faster. But at the flip side of that, we're talking 287 days, and that means there are some companies, some organizations that find this out much later than 287 days. So think of what you could do if that was your sole job and you had access into an environment, into an organization, how much intelligence you could find, what damage you could set up to do just in that amount of time. A lot of people remember last year, Colonial Pipeline. It infected me, impacted me here in North Carolina. I think we saw gas go up about $2 overnight when Colonial Pipeline got compromised. But the report is out. They were very forthcoming with how they got in, and ultimately what it revolved around was a user account was still left enabled, even though the user was not with the organization anymore. That account came up on the dark web, things where we could do credential monitoring, and it came up on the dark web, and someone bought it, and then they ended up using that account to log into the Colonial Pipeline VPN itself, and they had access to the environment. The only thing that hasn't really came out is how long they truly had access into Colonial Pipeline before they chose the day of attack. And then the last one is I'll leave you with, as far as facts today, and it's pretty staggering. These just came out from the 2021 report, but 83% of organizations that did get attacked by some kind of ransomware ploy actually fell for it. So I mean, you're talking 83% of organizations, someone turned loose whatever the attack vector was. Out of that, 40% of those never recovered their data for one reason or another. Either backups were corrupt, or they didn't have backups, or they didn't have the money to pay the ransom for one reason or another. That's pretty relevant. I mean, that's pretty impactful, especially when you consider small businesses that some of those probably end up having to close their doors. Next slide, please. The reason why I want to start out with this as the first series, of our summer series, is just over the course of a good part of the last year, talking with many of you that's on the call today, and other customers from coast to coast. One of the big things that I am seeing shift in the cybersecurity world is insurance companies. Insurance companies are now coming in with many more requirements than they ever have before. I think one of the ones that I remember seeing, there was an insurance company based out of the Midwest. They saw over 90 ransomware cybersecurity insurance claims being processed last year alone. And then I have a colleague here in the Southeast. He worked for a medium-sized insurance company, but they ended up having to close the doors because they ended up paying out more than they had brought in. So, I mean, when you talk about, many of you have already talked about and seen from your insurance, what they're coming back with as far as requirements. And if you're not able to meet those in a timely fashion, organizations are looking at higher premiums, possibly even reduced coverage. Talked with someone a couple months ago. They couldn't find a policy. They couldn't find anyone to carry them. Just because they were not able to check the boxes in the time frame that the carrier was requiring. So, I mean, if you haven't seen this yet, this is going to be definitely in your near future. One of the big things that they're going after is multi-factor authentication. Starting to see a lot of insurance carriers now require some kind of security operations center or some kind of managed visibility over their customers' environment. So, I mean, this is something that's only going to continue to get worse for businesses and organizations of the type of requirements that you're going to have to fulfill. Next slide, please. So I will go ahead and I will roll my eyes for everybody on this call. I remember when the NIST cybersecurity framework came out and these 5 pillars was everywhere you looked. I was one of those, you know, at the time I was a director, and it seemed like everybody was calling, everybody was sending flyers. You know, this was the latest thing since sliced bread. But the more and more I worked with it, the more and more I really, you know, adapted to it and adopted it in my environment, because it really does go under the KISS principle. You know, it keeps it simple. And so as we look at these 5 different pillars, you know, we try to keep that mentality both even in our personal lives. You know, when we talk about identify, you know, we identify what's important. You know, what is something that we value in the business. Maybe it's not always data. Maybe it's personnel. Maybe it's you know, those types of things. You know, we look at protect. You know, it's our traditional first line. You know, what have we invested in to put on the front line in hopes that it's going to stop the bad attackers. Then we look at detect. You know, we really want true data that we can trust with integrity to make sure that we make decisions based off of that data that we're getting. And when we talk about respond, we want to make sure that we have a methodical response. You know, we want to be able to say, hey, I know what to do if this happens. And then lastly, you know, we talk about recover. The whole thing about being able to recover is getting everything back up and going, making sure that the business stays operational, make sure people can get paid, customers can get products, services. That's ultimately what we want to get back to. And we want to go from, you know, go through this whole mentality, you know, quickly and methodically, and try to be as accurate as we can. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we talk about is identify. You know, what's important to us, what has value. And so when we look at goals, ultimately what we want to make sure is that we can identify, you know, what our assets are. You know, that could be the data, it could be maybe patents, it could be intellectual property, could be computer programming, even just the business model itself. Are we a service driven? You know, we have to be able to identify that, and then we have to be able to evaluate the risk that goes up against those assets. And then we have to make sure that that risk is accounted for in some form or fashion. And when we talk about risk, I mean, you know, you've got risk avoidance, deterrence, transfer, but ultimately you want to get down to either are you going to accept the risk and how we're going to do that. And then we never want to do any kind of risk rejection. I mean, we just, that can't happen. That's not a valid. We can't turn our heads to something that we see that, you know, is way off from being the way it should be. And so when we talk about actions, you know, what do we do after we identify? You know, we got to make sure that we have some kind of asset management tracker. Can we truly say that we know all of our technology assets within our environment right now? This can be anything from an Excel spreadsheet that you can tell me is up to date, or you can have automated tools that every time a new machine comes onto the network, that it's able to detect it and add it to some kind of inventory. And then from there, we can either vet it or we can quarantine it. And so with that, you know, there always has to be a plan. You know, what are we going to do as we discover new assets, or once a new asset comes into play? Do we know how to treat it? Do we know how to look at the risk against it, or put a monetary value on it? And those are the types of things that we want to do as we go through the identify. And some of the tools, resources that we can use for that is, you know, asset management, asset trackers, even going through and doing security assessments, which is something I'll talk about later in this presentation. But to get an idea of where your current posture is, you know, what's the current state of the environment? Are the things working the way that we hoped that they are working? And then lastly is making sure that you have those action plans. How do we make sure that we have all of our assets accounted for? How can we make sure that, we know what to do when we bring in a new asset? And those are all the things that we want to make sure that we have in place. Next slide, please. Next, we talk about protect. Are the doors closed? Have you put the lock on the gate? And some of the goals that we want to achieve by doing that is we want to make sure that we have the proper safeguards in place. And we want to make sure that we have the confidence and we have the ability that we can contain any kind of security event that comes across. And that's huge, is being able to contain. The last thing that we want to happen is an attack to break out, and then the attackers can sit there and run rampant across your network. We want to train the organization. As I mentioned before, phishing is the #1 attack vector right now. Typically, when I go speak, people come up to me afterwards. It's like, hey, if I make one change right now, what would you tell me to do? Well, you need to make sure that you're training your employees. They are truly the first line of defense, but they are also the weakest link in the chain. The more that they know, the more that they feel comfortable and confident with being able to recognize phishing attempts or malicious attachments, the better off our entire security plan will be. And we talk about some of the actions that we get into, wrapped around protect, is being able to have unique users. Do away with shared user accounts. That shared user account, if something happens on a shared user account, how do you truly know who did what and when? And to add on to that, for us that are administrators in the environment, we should have a separate account that we log into on a daily basis just to do our day-to-day tasks, and only reserve that administrative account when those permissions are required. We don't want to log in. I'll let one of the skeletons out of my closet. My user account for years was a domain admin as well. It was the same account that I logged into day to day. That's what I did my work as. Now, that was years ago. The landscape has definitely changed, but we understand now what the importance of that is. The actions that, as we wrap around that, train the employees, get some kind of security awareness training program in place. Make sure that the employees are familiar, that they see things that are currently happening. We have one inside a Davenport group right now. We go about once a month. I think we get a little 5 or 6 minute long video. It's it's comedy in nature, but at the same time, it's real world things that are happening. Recently, one of the series that we had was the barcodes. When we all went through COVID and we started going places, restaurants quit giving out menus and they started giving out little QR codes, and we had to scan it with our phones. It's just as simple as a bad guy putting a bad QR code sticker as the menu, and so that takes you to some place that you don't want to share your information. But most people don't even think about it now. They just scan it because that's the way it was for 2 years. And as we build our security program for our organization, base it off of the CIA triad. And we want to make sure that we focus on things as confidentiality, integrity of the information, and availability. We want to make sure that systems are available when they need to be available. And so if you keep that mindset in your thought process, then you can have a pretty robust organization. And as we talk about the tools, what tools do we use to protect? It's just what I mentioned, security awareness training. Get a program in place. You want to make sure that you have some kind of protective technology. I think we all grew up with the Symantec's and McAfee's that were, our first line of defense. It was our virus protection. And now that technology has quickly evolved into so much more. And then those old traditional antiviruses just don't cut it in the real world. We had to wait for someone to get hacked or attacked or a virus before anybody else could be protected. And then lastly, build solid, good processes wrapped around good, sound policies, to protect our assets. If we put these in place, and these are the guardrails. And so if we have the guardrails in place and the organization is trained around those, then ultimately we've done the first part of our job to protect our assets. Next slide, please. Next, we talk about detect. Are the cameras on? Have you put batteries in the fire alarms? Can we, as the goal, can we identify when, things are going on? If the batteries are no good or the cameras are unplugged, we have no visibility into what's truly happening. And so we want to make sure that we're able to discover events, swiftly. We want to make sure that we're monitoring everything that's going on. I know everyone on this call sleeps at some point. Many of the organizations that are here today don't have a 24/7 staff. But if we have these types of tools in place, possibly we can get notified. We will be able to go back. We will be able to replay, look into what really happened. And some of the actions to get us there, as we think about these types of things, is being able to check for events. Do I have some kind of logging utility, a centralized log server, or even a SIM? Can I go in and pull that information and be able to detect that breach faster than 287 days? That's ultimately what we've got to be able to do, is detect when something happens. And some of the tools that we can use around that is all the acronyms that you see in all of the flyers and advertisements that's going on today. EDR, MDR, NDR, and then there's another one now that's a big one. It's XDR. And so we can talk a little bit about those. EDR, that is where I talked about our traditional antivirus. Now it goes into an endpoint detection response. So it's able to do much more. Maybe it does artificial intelligence. Maybe it's getting ready to predict what's going to happen because file A showed up. But there's crumbs. This picks up on the breadcrumbs in so many ways. And then MDR is nothing more than EDR. It is managed detection and response. It's just a babysitter for EDR. Now this can be done internally. You have a team that is able to have eyes on the glass and looking over your EDR tools to detect when things are going on. Or maybe it's even contracting out that service. Maybe you look at like a SOC as a service, where you actually have a babysitting service while we are asleep. NDR, network detection response. That's where we get into a tool that is able to see what's really going on with the traffic, what's going through the bits and bytes as they move across the wire. Does it have malicious intent? Does it have a malicious destination? And that's what our EDR does. And then I didn't put it here, but XDR, I get a lot of questions about XDR. That's where we get into where you have multiple tools in your portfolio that are able to work together to give you a bigger picture. So maybe your EDR works with with your firewall, and you're able to use those two independent solutions, and that information can be aggregated, and you get something really relevant. You start to get a whole picture of the way everything played out. And then all of these can be monitored by a SOC, a security operations center. This is where we have the babysitting service working. These are the analysts and engineers that have the eyes on the glass and the fingers on the keyboard that are responding to any kind of incidents or events that we see pop up within the organization. And then lastly, we talk about the SIM. This is becoming a requirement, especially in healthcare. I see this being a huge shift within the last couple of years. But this is where all of your information goes. This is all of your logs. This can be from your firewall, from Active Directory, but this gives you a place of a black box that someone can pull and start replaying and seeing what actually transpired.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that in talking with customers that even you talked about the insurance companies and what they're asking for. The SOC and SIM, it's next on the list after MFA is all dealt with for sure.
Yep. I know, Ben, I've had a couple recent calls where we're starting to see those conversations come up because they've heard rumors of what, what requirements they're getting ready to have to check the box for. Next slide, please. So when we talk about respond, this is call for backup. This is call the wrecker service, call the police. We're ultimately looking for what we have to do because of something happened. The goals are wrapped around that is we want to make sure that we contain the impact. We don't want the attack to start on one device and we as, the technology gurus, the engineers, we don't want it to continue to spread throughout the environment. We want to make sure that we have the tools, we have those tools dialed in, that we get notified and maybe even automated responses. Maybe if A, B, and C are recognized, maybe that machine is dropped off the network. Maybe it's just implementing the mitigations across the board. There's several types of ways that we can actually respond, but we want to make sure that we have the proper tools and that they are effective in doing what they're doing. And so, the actions that we look at when we talk about how do we respond to these types of, incidents is being able to detect and prevent further damage. The ultimate goal shall always be that we continue to move our security program forward and improve our posture. And we need to make sure that we have metrics to show that we are improving it. The worst thing that can happen is an organization go in and buy all of the tools that are out there because they're great, but they're not dialed in and we don't really find out if they're truly working. And some of the tools that we can use to make sure that we are reacting properly is an incident response plan. You'll see this again shortly, but this is one of the biggest things that I see that many organizations lack. I have probably sat through and been involved in more ransomware events than I could possibly count right now. And it saddens me to go into an organization, and they're going through a security incident. They have ransomware, the data center's, shut down or locked up, encrypted. In the first couple hours of the security incident, everybody is starting to point fingers and starting to have heated conversations. IT department is pointing to the finance department saying, hey, if you'd have put this in my budget, if you'd approved this, this wouldn't have happened. Well, then you have C-level staff coming to the IT leaders saying, hey, if you would have done this, this wouldn't have happened. And we get away completely from being able to react to what's going on. Having that organized response to get the business back up and going. Get the mitigation process in place. Make sure that you have a methodical plan, that if A happens, we have a plan for that. If we see, something, if this happens, make sure that these people are notified and that they get engaged because that's their job. And some of the tools that we have, I talked about the policies and processes around that, is things like the business continuity plan, making sure that we have a structure to how the organization should continue to function. Maybe it's the critical communications plan. Who is ultimately going to be responsible for talking to the public, talking to the shareholders? What about to the customers? You get into the continuity of operations. If it's worst case scenario doomsday, how can we find a way to continue to operate the business? How can we continue to provide services, maybe collect money, cut purchase orders? How about pay our employees? One of the worst events that I'd worked with, they had already been down for 2 weeks and they had to make the decision of how they were going to pay their employees. You get into that type of situation, the last thing you want to do is have your employees, a mass exodus because we can't get the systems back up to even pay them. High availability, think about failover. How can we create redundancy within our environment to make sure that things can continue? we don't want to go back to have to writing purchase orders by hand or tracking inventory with paper and pencil because we can't get the systems up. So maybe we can factor in high availability to make sure that the critical systems can continue to operate. Next slide, please. Recover. Now it's time to rebuild. Now we've got to build the house back or mend the fence. We got to get everything back up and going. And when we talk about the goals wrapped around recover, we want to make sure that we have everything that we need drawn out in a master plan to get the business back up and operational. Disaster recovery. Those are the types of things that we think about. Get the coordinated communication. Make sure that the people that are assigned to be the ones out there talking to the public or to the media or to the employees, make sure they understand their part. Test the processes over your recovery. Just because we take the time to sit down at the table and draw up a disaster recovery plan, we have to make sure that that's tested. And some of the actions that you take as we look to recover our environment, recover the business function, is have that tested plan. Make sure that it is vetted and that every piece of it that's in there works as you say it does. We don't want our employees that's involved with our incident response to wing it. That's the last thing that we really truly want, because we don't know what the effects from them winging it is going to do to the rest of the situation. Make sure there's a formalized communication plan. If we don't want employees talking to the media or social media, we need to make sure that everyone knows that. Make sure that there's only one person that's going to be relaying this message. Some of the tools that we can use in our recovery process, as we draw it on the table, draw it on the map, is do we have on and off-site backups? Are we able to say that maybe we have maybe an operational air gap to make sure that backup is only online when it needs to be? We don't want our backups, on the same network or same, accessible, as the rest of our data. One of the ones that I personally worked with is the company themselves. Their offsite backups was on the same subnet, a layer 2 subnet at their colo. So when the bad guys turned loose the ransomware, they turned it loose at both their on-site and their off-site backups because they were readily available. They were scannable and easily accessible anywhere in the network. And so I mentioned the incident response plan again here for the sole purpose of any time that we test our plan or any time that we ever have to engage our incident response plan, we should always be finding ways to improve it. In the military, we called it a hot wash, after action review. We want to take the lessons learned, what went right, what went wrong, what could we have done better, and we bring that back to the table and we go ahead and we make those changes to the incident response plan. We always want to make sure that maybe next time we plan for A or B. Maybe we want to make sure that things get faster, so we dial it in even more. It should be a living document that we're continuing to improve. Make sure that we assign a criticality to our assets. We don't want to, recover the server that has everybody's shared music on the network before we do a domain controller. We don't want to really restore, a CFO's laptop before we get the finance system back up and going. Make sure that we have a methodical approach to what is truly critical to get the business back up and operational, so we can, as leaders, control the situation, have a calm, methodical approach to get the business back up and operational. Next slide, please. And so one of the things I've done is I've taken the experience that I had working within the Department of Defense industry for over 10 years. And everything to me working in that environment was black and white. I mean, it was policy driven audit. There was black and white to tell you how to do every single thing. So I've taken that experience of what really worked well with those, and I've created, it's a security assessment that I'm doing at no cost for customers right now to help drive these types of conversations. My ultimate goal is to pass the knowledge that I have, that I've collected along the years, and pass it on to the next guy. Pay it forward. Because I don't want anybody on this call to be the next one to call me at 2 o'clock in the morning. They've already been up for 12 hours straight, and I find out that they have ransomware and that the bad guys have demanded 50 Bitcoin. So what I've done is I've taken a security assessment. I've used the SANS 20, the CIS 20 as just my general framework. And I've created it's about 150 questions. And typically it takes 60 to 9 minutes to walk through it. And it's just a good, over a cup of coffee conversation. We dial into 150 different controls, and these are just best practices. And we go through that and we see how you really are stacking up against best practices that are vetted and approved by the security industry right now. It's no pen test. It's not a true, audit. That's not the goal, but it's more of an enlightenment. Things that are you doing or should you be doing, and it covers different areas. Anything from hardware, your asset tracking, software management. Make sure that you have antivirus, incident response plans, how you're doing your backups. And we go through and we see at what level do you have those controls implemented? Is it something that you hope to achieve? Is it something that's on your roadmap? Or maybe you're on the last mile. Maybe it's just about ready to be completely dialed in. Ben, do we have a question?
Not a question. I just like to comment on this because I've been a part of a lot of these security assessments with Brian here. And the single most important thing that I've seen, because we know we're preaching to the choir here. We're preaching to the people that have been asking for these and know about these attacks, but maybe have a tough time translating to the others in the organizations that write the checks for these types of solutions that you've been asking for years to prevent these issues. And the single most important thing that I've seen from these security assessments is that deliverable. It's that report that outlines the issues that about that we're documenting in your environment and how to resolve some of those. And I've always encouraged all the IT professionals I've worked with that we've delivered these reports to. I say, hey, print this out, hand it to all the executives, all the board members, whoever, and say, hey, I really need you to read this, because it's in plain language where they can very much, anybody in your organization can understand what we're talking about here. And it gives you a lot of that information that you may have been talking about and you may have been able to bring up, but it's right there in their face. And they don't want it gives them the importance of how important it's been to you, but then also you see it from a third party, kind of maybe unfortunately sometimes holds a little bit more credibility out there than what you've been screaming for years. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't done any type of security assessment with us or with another provider out there, highly recommend it for folks that are out there, because that deliverable is priceless to help you with your arguments with the board.
Thanks, Ben. And yeah, I mean, these types of things, just the security assessment, the things that I've talked about, identify, protect, detect, respond and recover. If we kind of move with that mentality as we continue to strengthen our security posture, I mean, the ultimate thing was we will start making our security program more resilient. Insurance companies will take a breath of fresh air when they come in and sit down and talk about your renewal for your cyber insurance. And that's what we ultimately want to do, is we want to continue to prop up the business for success. Next slide, please. Any questions from today? Anything that that has come up in this discussion? Anything that we might need to talk about deeper? I kind of know talking about security is kind of like talking about dirty laundry. Some people are concerned about what they might not be doing well, but as a whole, security is not going to get better until we continue to have these conversations. We share ideas, even share our problems. How are other people solving this? So definitely open to it.
Yeah, if you have any questions, now's the time. Feel free to take yourself off mute, ask away, or put it in the chat if you're not in a place where you can talk.
It's a quiet crowd today.
Okay, I know, quiet crowd. I think they're just waiting for the excitement of the session 2 and 3 here. They're waiting to get to that. Um, Mike Klaus has a question here. So how do we arrange an assessment? I can take that on, Brian. So from this presentation, we will, each of your account executives in your appropriate area of the country will be following up with you. You'll get an email from them thanking for attending this event, but then also, hey, if you want to get in touch with us, here's my contact information. To put it simply, just reply to that and say, hey, I'd like to take advantage of that assessment that Brian talked about. And then from there, it's first a call to kind of plan it out. You know, Brian and your account executive will talk about, hey, what do you want to get out of this assessment? Because obviously it can be enormous, it can be very pointed, however you want to do it. But if there's issues that you see in your environment that you really want to highlight and really want to dive deep into, hey, we can focus on that as well as other things. So we will have a planning call, and then on that planning call, we'll schedule when we're going to have that assessment. And then Brian, maybe you want to talk a little bit about how that process goes, that actual assessment conversation goes.
Yeah, I mean, typically with the assessment, what I've done is we walk through the 150 controls, and really what I'm looking for is when I ask you, have you implemented XYZ? What I'm looking for is just conversation. Is it something that you don't have at all? Have you just now started to implement it? Or can you tell me without a shadow of a doubt, yeah, this is rock solid. I've got my environment locked down with this control. And we just walk through those 150 controls, and I enjoy the conversation because a lot of times the questions comes right back at me. It's what do they mean here? And I like to take it because I can explain it in real world, what this control does and maybe even the impact that if it's not in place. And I think right now, I think the record is 7 hours. I did one of my security assessments and it was a little over 7 hours. So that goes to show anywhere from 1 to 7 hours.
Yeah, so buckle up, and I always encourage, especially at the start of them, like, be honest, on this stuff. Don't cover up stuff because that's just, you're gonna trip over yourself, really, with a lot of the stuff.
And
So
I'm
be
very
honest, and it's and we're discreet in everything that we find out. But if you're not open and honest on this, you're not going to get the results that are going to help you in your job and your responsibilities there for sure.
If you
Now,
have dead
Eric,
bodies or skeletons in the closet, you can still continue to hide them, but just remember that in that deliverable that Ben mentioned, that won't be called out. The report will only be as honest as you are with me.
yep. And Eric had a question here about training. Do we have like a specific end user training system, or use a third party for training users? I can take a part of that, and Brian, just highlight if I miss anything here. So, in all our security conversations, a lot of customers already have solutions. I think the one that we've heard a lot of is KnowBe4, is kind of that end user training that's out there. We also provide a solution that's kind of an all-encompassing security as a service solution that includes some end user training as a part of that. In fact, that's what we use internally here at Davenport Group, is that all-encompassing security solution with the training. I think Brian mentioned that's kind of interesting, and actually you pay attention to it. And a lot of the times I always tell people is, a lot of the times when I do those trainings, I'll at lunchtime or my next break, I'm calling my parents and saying like, hey, y'all don't need to be scanning QR codes at restaurants. Just on your phone, go to the website and click menu. Those little things that I learned as a part of those trainings. my parents are the most vulnerable people when it comes to IT, I feel. But those are some of the solutions that we provide. Again, we can obviously, if you're interested in that, we can have deeper conversations around the security platforms that we provide out there. Bullfish, Patrick, what's that? I've never heard of that.
I think that's done through ID Agent. I think that.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a Kaseya company. I've been trying to
Okay.
research a little bit because they do dark web monitoring and stuff like that too. I don't know about pricing, but it's one I've heard of.
Yeah, let me know. We have access to that as well, so definitely we can have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And Rob, thank you for the highlight. Yes, there are a lot of kind of D-list actors that are on these trainings, and I think Tia Carrera was on there from Wayne's World fame, and then John Lovitz, of course, we all know him. So it's
I think
kind of funny.
Joey Lawrence was on the last one. So yeah.
Yes.
That reminds
They're
me.
funny.
What's the date? Yeah.
For sure.
No, good questions.
Yep.
Very good questions.
Yeah. Any other questions for anybody? Since we have some time here, we got about 8 minutes before we're going to end this.
Brian, I've got one. So documentation is absolutely key, and we had talked a little bit about this before, but as far as policies, there are a lot of small businesses, and I work at one of them that documentation is very weak. Do you have any suggestions on getting started on writing these policies, incident response and stuff like that? Because I agree, they're extremely important, but with small shops, it's very hard to do. Or do you recommend any services that could assist with it?
I don't know of services that can assist. I have started to work as a virtual CISO with some of our customers and start going through and actually working with them on creating policies in-house, or even doing just a policy audit to go over with them. And so I sit down with them in that advisory manner, if you will. We take a look at what they got. How can we, is it really set up around the business? Or is it a cookie cutter template from the internet, and we make sure that it's applied. I will always tell anyone that asks me, one of the very first ones that we need to have is that incident response. 9 times out of 10, going through some kind of security incident, there's no one that knows what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to be. So it just looks like a chicken coop. Everybody's going everywhere. Everybody's trying to do everything. You've got the group of people that have already jumped in and trying to figure out how it happened or why it happened. And you've got some people that are, the doomsdayers. That incident response plan, the best way I like to put it, it's the script. It's what everybody is supposed to be doing on the stage. If you have not been to a security incident yet, the chances are in your favor that eventually you will. And so we need to make sure that we start with something like an incident response plan to be ready for that. And as far as creating documentation, I might tell you bad habits. My thing is when I took over, I didn't have documentation. And so, it just started with an Apple wiki that I created. And then I would create keywords and just start creating a scrolling document with screenshots. But now, there's things, Patrick, like you and I talked about, that are out there that are readily available, that can create KBs that we can assign to our service desk as we create that documentation. So there's plenty out there, and just like we found out, it might be even tools that you have that you might not be completely aware of what all they can do. So maybe that is something that we can do, is just take a look at what's your current solution stack and seeing what's available. But no, good, Patrick. Thank you.
Great. And we'll continue to stay on here for questions, but if you can go next slide, I wanted to talk about kind of next steps here. We do have future summer security series coming up, August 25th and 22nd. I believe when you signed up for this, you probably signed up for the other two as a part of that. So we really encourage you to attend those. They will not be the same presentation as we're doing today. They'll be kind of adding on because as you know, with security, there's a lot of things to cover out there. And so we want to make sure you attend those as well. And then next slide there, we also want to thank you for attending and listening to us today, and hopefully getting a lot of good information to then go to others in the organization and educate them like we're doing today. And with that, we're going can sign up for a barbecue grilling set or $50 to REI. Who doesn't love that? By emailing marketing@davenportgroup.com. Make sure you include the word resilient in there to receive this. We're also going to have some really nice thank you gifts for the next series too. So just I recommend you attend those as well. And then you'll also be getting some follow-up from the appropriate account executive in your area to connect with you either on something that we talked about today around security or anything else of all the solutions that we're focused on. We are that full-scale IT solution provider, and we're here to help you really in any way, shape, or form, focusing on that relationship with our customers, because that's really what's important when it comes to working with folks is the trust and relationship that you have there to continue to work with you and help you out. So with that, Brian and I will stay on here a little bit longer, probably all the way up until 2 o'clock Central for any additional questions, but we'll be in touch soon. Appreciate everybody taking some time out of your day. Hopefully you felt this was very helpful in kicking this off, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one on August 25th.
Thanks, Ben, and I agree. Thank you all for tuning in today. Look forward to seeing you all again on the next series.
And I already put it in the chat. This is Brad Zwilling, but I want to thank Brian. We did a security assessment with him, and it's very good. I thought it would be an hour each time, and I think we spent 2.5 hours doing it and then going over the plan. So I put my notes in the chat, but I wanted to say it verbally too.
Hey, thanks, Brad. Good to hear from you. Good to see you again.
Thank you all, and that's the end of our presentation, but we'll stay on here if you have any remaining questions for another couple minutes.